I just watched Kevin's video on YouTube on the Queen's Gambit Accepted. In it, he covers 29 positions in the Queen's Gambit and 30 positions if you count the initial position of chess. And I'll show you how I know that in a minute, because what I've done here is I've opened up an ebook in Chess Openings Wizard and I put in the moves that I saw in the video. D4, D5, and then of course C4 starts the Queen's Gambit. Now accepting it means that black is going to be taking the pawn, and the pawn is undefended right now, hence it's a gambit. But as Kevin points out, it's not a real gambit because white can play E3 or E4, and he shows E3 in his video. And if you try to hang on to that pawn by playing something like B5, white can just play A4 and trade off those pawns and then take the pawn on C4. And if black is silly enough to try to hold that one up with C6, then at that point white goes ahead and just plays AB5. And if you try to take back with CV5, it's a blunder because, as Kevin points out, you just play with white, Queen F3, and the rook is hanging. And if you don't want to throw away a whole rook, you probably want to play Knight C6. But once you drop that piece, well, you're down a piece with check in the opening. You may as well resign as black. How I know that there are 30 positions in this whole video is in this ebook. I put them all in, and I'll say help about this ebook. There are 30 unique positions in this particular ebook. But what if I wanted to learn hundreds of positions that I really need to know? Not the ones that are really bad, but the ones I really need to know in the Queen's Gambit Accepted, for white or for black. What if I wanted to learn thousands of positions?
After looking at some moves that black should never play, I've switched to another ebook so we can look at some good moves for black in the Queen's Gambit Accepted. I want to look at this from black's point of view, so I'll go Commands and uncheck where it says white at bottom. And now we're looking at it from black's point of view. And after C4, Queen's Gambit, we'll take it. The Queen's Gambit Accepted. Now in the video we watched earlier, white played E3. At this point, this author recommends playing E5, giving the pawn back. And after E5, what would happen if he tries to take that pawn and try to take the one on C4? Well, if he plays D takes E5, he's recommending trading off queens, dragging the king out to the center, and then just go ahead and play Knight C6 and pick the pawn back up. Now we want to check out what would happen if white would play Knight F3. So let's rewind, go back to the start, and after D4, D5, C4, D takes C4, Knight F3. Now here, the author is recommending just playing Knight F6, developing your pieces. If white goes ahead and plays E3, go ahead and play E6. Now there's another recommendation we'll come back to later, but let's look at E6 here first. E6, and of course the bishop is going to take the pawn on C4. So we've lost our center pawn for a C pawn. But we can do the same thing to white right away. We can get our C pawn out there and exchange it off for his center pawn. If he castles A6, this is actually a position from Spassky versus Fischer. So Bobby Fischer, the world champion, is playing the black side of this against another world champion. So you got to figure if the Queen's Gambit Accepted played this way is good enough for Bobby Fischer, it's probably good enough for us too. In the game, Spassky realized he wasn't going to be able to keep his D4 pawn intact, so he actually played D takes E5. Fischer traded off queens. Of course, he recaptured, and then black retook on C5. The game ended up in a draw. So let me rewind again and show you that other idea I promised you. After D4, D5, C4 takes, Knight F3, and then Knight F6. When he plays E3, we can go ahead and play, before we play E6, go ahead and play Bishop G4 and pin that knight. Obviously, it's almost always going to happen that white's going to take the pawn back on C4. Now play E6, and you've got a very decent position here. You've got the pawn back, and let's take a look at least one line. H3, go ahead and back it up to H5, and if he plays Knight C3 at this point, go ahead and play Knight BD7. Let's go back and take a look at if he tries to attack that B7 pawn. If I back up and he tries to play Queen B3, attacking the pawn, he's recommending go ahead, just trade off the knight, double up the pawns, and after GF3, go ahead and play Knight BD7 anyway. He's got comments down here explaining why, because if white tries to grab that pawn, you can go ahead and just play C5. You're going to get a slight advantage. Hopefully I have you at least a little bit curious about where I'm getting all these ideas. In this particular book by FIDE master Chuck Schulian, he's teaching you how to play the black side of D4, D5, and the Queen's Gambit Accepted is the main line he recommends. If I go help about this ebook, instead of just 30 positions, this particular ebook now has 10,505 positions. What's really interesting is this book is about more than just the Queen's Gambit accepted. If I go back and rewind, for instance, and after d4, d5, what if white instead plays e4, which is the Blackmar-Demer Gambit, a very dangerous gambit? Well, he's got recommendations for that too. He says go ahead and take it, and when white usually plays knight c3 here, play e5, again, safely giving back the pawn. Now you'll see all these different variations. Knight takes e4, bishop e3, d5, d5, queen h5, and all these comments down here are all in this ebook. Now this ebook is not free, this one's for sale. But you can download the program I'm using called Chess Openings Wizard for a free trial anytime at bookup.com, and I hope you are curious enough to take a look at this book by Chuck Julian. Now you know a few dozen good positions for black in the Queen's Gambit accepted. And I really am hoping that you're curious enough to take a look at the 10,500 annotated positions that Chuck Julian's put together for all the openings after d4, d5, and with the Queen's Gambit accepted being the main line. And you'll find that at bookup.com. Thanks for watching.